Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video. Today we're going to talk about Hordes, more specifically how they could be fixed. So without further ado, let's begin. Horde factions are an interesting alternative way on how to play Total War. They do not occupy settlements on the campaign map, instead each Horde army of a Horde faction acts as a mobile settlement. Each army would have its own respective population growth, be able to build buildings and recruit units from said buildings. The Horde system itself is quite old, having featured in a number of Total War games, but it is in Total War Warhammer where it's starting to show its age. Horde factions don't tend to do quite well on the campaign map. Obviously the player-controlled factions seem to do a bit better, but the AI factions tend to get destroyed rather quickly, sometimes within the first few turns of spawning into the game. We are aware that a Horde Rework will eventually be released. Whether it is with Total War Warhammer 2 or Total War Warhammer 3 is completely unknown at the moment. As we are aware, Creative Assembly do look towards YouTubers, forum posters and commenters in regards to any sort of inspiration. Now I've recently been playing over the Horde factions as thematically and lore-wise I quite enjoy them. I have always been a big fan of the Beastmen and the Warriors of Chaos in the tabletop, and we are aware that they're going to get their own respective reworks eventually, but Hordes themselves need to be fixed as a whole. For the purpose of this video, we'll be going over how Hordes currently work and offering any suggestions on how they could be fixed, with any suggestions on how this could affect one race in specific also being added to this video. Hordes don't occupy settlements on the campaign map, instead they have their armies enter encamp stance to quickly create buildings before moving on. This is the generalized system for all Horde factions, and while that does indeed work quite well, barring some minor issues which we'll get to later in the video, I do believe that each Horde faction should at least have access to one settlement in the game. This could be a lore-friendly location, a 6 to 10 building settlement which would act as your generalized hub for your chosen faction. This area should not allow you to build up any economic buildings, but rather garrison upgrades, buildings for recruitment which any hordes in the area would be able to make use of, and finally buildings that would improve growth so you could be able to spawn armies. Possible settlements for each of these races and factions could be as follows. The Warriors of Chaos could get access to a Chaos stronghold located in the Chaos Wastes. The Beastmen could have some sort of great herdstone which would represent a gathering location for the many tribes. And Nakai the Wanderer can stay the same, to be honest. He's already got a unique system which should stay completely unique to him. Another possible addition could also be allowing them to build more central hubs, only in locations known to be lore-friendly for these respective factions. For example, the Warriors of Chaos should be able to take over the Brass Keep and use that as a central hub. The Beastmen would be a bit more difficult considering that they don't settle anywhere, but they could easily add in a few different locations to be considered great herdstones. Let's move on to the second point. Horde armies have a maximum of 10 building slots when fully upgraded. This in my opinion works perfectly fine. They already have capital sized settlements as their Horde. The only thing I would actually change is giving more building slots, possibly 12 to 14, to legendary characters, and thus giving them unique buildings only available to them. Just as a basic example, let's look at Sigvald. Sigvald himself is a champion of Slaanesh, so with extra building slots he could be given access to Slaaneshi type buildings. Especially if this rework comes into effect in Total War Warhammer 3, where he could possibly even recruit some demonettes. Maybe even some lore-friendly recolors of the Warriors of Chaos to give them more of a Slaaneshi feel. Moving on to the third point, as Horde factions cannot take over a settlement, they will always sack, loot or raze after conquering it. Makes perfect sense, especially for the Beastmen, but for the Warriors of Chaos I'd like to see an extra addition to this. Should you have any vassals as the Warriors of Chaos, you should be able to gift these settlements to your vassals. This is so you can boost them up a little bit and actually make them quite useful. You normally end up with a vassal faction or two as the Warriors of Chaos and they just don't really do anything. So maybe by actually helping them get a bigger empire, they might be more inclined to do some damage. The AI for the vassal factions does have to be updated though, considering that in most cases they just run to their deaths. On the fourth point, Horde faction buildings often don't generate much income, so Horde factions rely on the money they get from winning battles and sacking/razing enemy settlements to get cash. This works perfectly fine, however once again looking to the Warriors of Chaos, there should be some sort of interactive system which determines how much of a tribute you get from your vassals. I mean, if you're going to help them get a bigger empire, you might as well be getting something out of that too. Now we can look towards everything revolving around Horde Growth. Instead of normal growth, Hordes have Horde Growth. Horde Growth generates population surplus as normal. However, unlike normal factions, where usually only the main settlement building requires population growth to upgrade, many Horde buildings require population growth to be built or upgraded. This system works, but it becomes a massive hassle when you start recruiting more armies, as the population cost for each building is increased as you build or upgrade other buildings. This becomes a massive problem, especially for later game stuff. This is mostly a problem for newer armies who are forced to start off from fresh, and as you can imagine, this becomes a bit of a problem. By the time that you're starting to form new hordes, your enemy factions will already have mid to late game units, meaning that power-wise you will be at a massive disadvantage. It's not so much of a problem for the beastmen as they can hide their hordes, but the warriors of chaos themselves can't hide, meaning that they're prime targets when out in the open. Obviously, as discussed before, the hub settlements could also work rather nicely here, as they could form armies there which would be much safer and not have to go outside and fight enemies until they're ready. But the increasing cost of buildings and upgrades in the mechanic form does not work rather well. It needs to be removed and just replaced with either a flat fee, which would vary from building to building in terms of population surplus, or only have certain buildings locked behind the population surplus paywall. While in some cases you can increase your horde population rate by either sacking settlements, random events, or even sometimes via technology, it's still a very big problem, especially mid to late game. This brings us to the last point about Horde Growth. Recruiting a new lord from your horde starts a new horde. This requires population surplus. New hordes must often be protected until they are large enough to survive on their own. Once again, a central hub works well here, and yes, this has been a bit of a reoccurring theme on this video, but I do believe that a central hub settlement will make things a lot easier for horde factions. But that's not the only issue. We also have the population surplus issue once again. As you recruit more hordes, the cost of recruiting does increase every time you wish to recruit another one. This isn't so much of a problem early game, as usually to recruit a new horde, the cost of population is usually quite cheap. 2, 4, 6, that's perfectly fine, but once it starts getting to the population cost of around 12 upwards, that's when you start to notice it. Not even 12, sometimes just at 8. The maximum I've normally seen in terms of population is you can get 1 population surplus per turn, more or less. So say for example, if you need 8 population surplus, you will require 8 turns to be able to recruit one. That is, of course, if you don't build any new buildings as you're waiting to be able to recruit a new army. This new army starts off with everything at base level, which means that they're quite weak and easily to be defeated. I'm not going to mention the central hub again because I believe that that's already been mentioned enough this video, but I think there's 2 ways of making this better. Firstly, it's either just normalizing the cost of price, rather than having it increasing, just put it at a flat fee for all times, maybe around 6 population surplus at all times to be able to spawn a new army, or secondly, rework the system entirely. What I've had in my head is something a bit more different. Say for example, you have been moving around with your horde and have managed to gather a fair amount of population surplus, and you're feeling confident now that you may be able to sustain a new army. There could be a form of tier system in terms of recruiting a new army for your faction. The first tier would cost very little population surplus, which would only have the starting building and the lord in question. The second tier would have a few starting units and minor buildings, but would cost a mid-level amount of population surplus. And lastly, the higher tier army would then cost a greater amount of population surplus, maybe 10 upwards, which would spawn with a decent amount of buildings built and a decent amount of mid to high level tier units. Compare it to the spawnings of AI Brayherds when playing as the Beastmen, but controlled by the player permanently rather than being AI controlled. If you're able to spawn new armies with varying degrees of sizes, something like this would probably add to the experience of the Horde factions themselves, rather than just starting off fresh, especially late game in a campaign where a fresh new army is basically just a burden until you can get it geared enough. Now, I am aware that the topic of Horde reworks has been beaten to death by content creators, forum posters and so on, but I do believe that this is an important topic, not just because the Beastmen and the Warriors of Chaos are Hordes, but also it is very likely that the Demons of Chaos and the Ogre Kingdoms will be Hordes too, or at least Hordes in some certain degree. So with that logic, the generalized Horde rework would have to come into effect at least before the release of either the Ogre Kingdoms or the Demons of Chaos, whichever comes first. Or alongside them of course, but there needs to be a rework done in general. Now if you guys have any thoughts and suggestions in regards to any possible Horde rework, let me know your thoughts in the comments below and let's start a bit of a discussion. As I've said before, it is rather known that Creative Assembly do look at forum posters, YouTube creators and so on, so this might be a good way to get our thoughts voiced, especially since the Hordes themselves are incredibly boring at the moment. And it's just kinda sad considering that the Beastmen and the Warriors of Chaos are both Chaos factions, which means that Chaos has been the weakest alignment in the whole of the Total War Warhammer series until a fix is implemented. But with that my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various different social media links such as Facebook, Instagram and Discord where you can get in contact with the Great Book team. Also in the description section below is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Using our special link and also the special code, which is also in the description below, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons, your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A special thank you to Ryan Bertsche and Gibraltar LUSC for subscribing to us at our Fame level, you guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule and VSVasan for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you guys enough. The money earned from Patreon is going directly back into the channel, slowly upgrading little bits and bobs, just trying to get to a higher level of content for you guys. And a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing and commenting on these videos. The support has been insane lately and honestly we can't be more than excited. But with that my friends, thank you so much for watching once again and we shall see you all again very soon. Have a good day.